Hello and welcome to the Energy Connect studio at Future Energy Asia Exhibition and Summit 2024 in Bangkok. I'm delighted to have sitting next to me in the studio today Renaud Meyer, resident representative of UNDP or the UN Development Program in Thailand. Renaud, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Thanks for having me.
To start off, could you tell us why energy transition must pick up pace and what needs to be done globally in terms of addressing the energy trilemma going forward?
Well, I think we need to bring this back to the whole agenda of climate change, right? This is really our point of departure in UNDP and in our role of providing support to member states to achieve their commitments. And when it comes to climate, those commitments are super ambitious, as we know, and require not only technical solutions, but also, and this is usually where it becomes more tricky, political will, strong political will. Now, you're talking about disrupting economic models that have been in place for decades with a lot of interests on the part not only of government and society at large, but obviously the private sector also. And any change, as we know, requires courage, requires additional resources. So there's a natural tendency of us humans to prefer to stay in our comfort zones and where we are used to doing things in a certain way, etc. So I think this disruption is of utmost urgency because we know that the current models of development are just taking us in the wall. And as our Secretary General has many times, unfortunately, had to remind us, this is a survival issue for human race today. The evolution of climate and its impact on nature, on agriculture, on health, on economy at large are clear. I mean, it's crystal clear. There used to be some skeptics, but I think we've convinced them now and they're on board. But even if you talk to farmers in the Chao Phraya Basin here in Thailand, which is the hub where all the agricultural production is happening, they will tell you there's a profound disruption of the weather that impacts on the agricultural productivity. So I think if we want to improve the resilience and adapt countries today, this transition is critical. It is urgent, but it also has to take a holistic approach, right? And I think what we see, and it's the conversations we're having here, for example, at Forum Mobility Asia, is one technology is just not going to cut it, right? You really need a profound reform, rethinking, re-engineering of the whole energy sector, from production to distribution to consumption. And it cannot just be imposed on people, otherwise there will be some resistance, right? So we need to bring also the people together. And this is why in UNDP, we don't talk about energy transition, we talk about just energy transition. So to take this holistic approach and make sure that people are involved, people understand the necessity, but that also both negative and positive aspects are equally shared, right? So the responsibility is not just on one aspect or one sector of society, but it is shared among both the producers, the consumers, the regulatory forces. But that the positive impact, right? Ultimately what we will yield out of this energy transition is also shared equally, and ultimately the lives of everyone will be improved.
That's a very, very vital point that you spoke about just energy transition, and then you also referenced the Chao Phraya Basin. And so talking about Thailand, how do you see this delicate balance between the growing energy demand as well as meeting climate goals playing out in the future?
Adaptation is critical in Thailand, right? I mean, I think this is a country that is highly vulnerable to climate change, according to all the studies that have been undertaken. And we've seen, whether it's in the coast, the reality of the coral, so the whole tourism industry, which obviously highly depend on the quality of nature, but agriculture, forestry, the whole economy of the country is, in one way or another, highly reliant on the quality of the natural resources and therefore on their sustainable management. Right? So when we come to energy, the challenge in Thailand is that about 85% of its energy is still based on fossil fuels. So there is not only an issue of cost, but also of emissions. Right? And right now, what we see is a strong push and incentive on e-mobility, so electric vehicles. But like often, our government identifies a solution, but equates it to the solution, right? And that's a bit the challenge that we have. We're not saying that it's wrong, but we're saying that it has to go at a pace where the ecosystem can also be reformed in the same vein, right? So just a few examples. Right now, based on 2023 data, about 40% of the new vehicles that are coming on the market are electric, right? Different types of electric vehicles, but overall 40%. A significant increase, right? So right now, it translates into an increase on demand of electricity. But when this electricity is brown electricity or uncleaned electricity, you're actually defeating the purpose of the whole transition, right? I was more recently in Nepal, a very different context where today 65% of new vehicles on the market registered are electric vehicles. But there, 85% of their energy mix is clean. It's biomass, it's hydro. So the demand of electricity does not translate in an increase of greenhouse gas emissions. So there it's a win-win. But if we were to transfer the same equation and situation here in Thailand, we would have serious issues because we would actually increase and therefore take Thailand backwards in terms of its progress towards their net zero and carbon neutral objectives of 2050 and 2065. So the message that we're giving to government and to all the stakeholders in the energy transition sector is, have a gradual approach. Look at the whole picture, a holistic systems thinking approach to this energy transition. The same is true on labor. Are you training the engineers that will fix and repair electric vehicles? Right now, very, very few people actually know how to, where to even open it, and find what's to be fixed. And downstream, what are you going to do with all the batteries, right? There is currently no investments in the recycling of the batteries, and they're just going to be piling up somewhere and try to be forgotten. But honestly, that's not the solution either. So there's a real challenge in this green energy transition. There's a political will, but there's also the need to have a concerted effort at bringing all the different players together and have a vision, for what this means for a country like Thailand.
Absolutely, and like you touched upon the problem with batteries, and even the grid. The grid needs to be cleaned up.
Absolutely.
So going forward, do you think there should be more robust policies around a circular economy that can help?
Absolutely. I was recently on a small island in the Gulf of Thailand, and there was a very visionary hotel manager who told me, I brought in some golf carts, electric golf carts, right, on the island to reduce, to kind of an attempt at making the island carbon neutral, ahead of everybody, which of course is an understandable good marketing incentive, right? But today, where are those golf carts? They're at the back of the hotel, unmaintained, not used anymore, simply because he was ahead of his time probably, and did not think of, again, bringing one or two people, training them to how to maintain those golf carts. So even when you have a good idea, even when you have a good political will, if you lack, the whole back office in a way, right? The whole foundation of this transition, it's unfortunately going to fail. And I think it's a serious matter because, there's sufficient skepticism and reluctance on the part of the general public. So if government doesn't give the best example, right, of putting in place those regulations, those policies, government is very good at making plans, right? And each ministry does its own plan, often uncoordinated also, because everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. Flavor of the month, energy transition, here we go, we all have a plan. But they don't speak to each other. And very importantly, they don't translate into policies and regulations. So the plans remain a plan, the vision remains a vision, and there's no action taken. And this action is difficult to take because, again, as I said earlier, it's going to disrupt habits. It's going to force on people different types of usage, different types of activities, and transformation of the whole society. But there has to be an educational effort. There has to be explanation, awareness, so that it's willingly that individuals and citizens of Thailand will change their habits.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point. And also when we talk about implementing those policies, let's say those policies are in place, then to implement and put them into action, we need money. Now, finance has always been a critical factor, especially when you talk about clean energy. the International Energy Agency expects that it will take $6 trillion per year until 2030 to keep 1.5 under control. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is, yes, it will cost money. Let's face it, right? I mean, there's no need to put it behind us. But let's also think of where we're putting the money today, right? And in development, especially in the sector that we call development financing, we know that the issue is not the quantity of the money, but to what we allocate this money, right? Look at Europe. Look at the subsidies that the European Union is giving to the agricultural sector. Look at all those countries around the world, including here in Thailand, where the government subsidizes so that it reduces the cost for popularity, for votes, for making, ultimately, even if it's with the good intent of making the life of the consumers easier, but that cannot be a long-term way of dealing with it. We spend so much more money today on subsidizing fossil fuels than on investments in renewable energy. Right? So I don't really buy the argument that, oh, this is being made difficult simply because of the cost. No, I think it goes back to this issue of political will, choices that the government needs to make, irrespective of its popularity, right? And not to give bad habits to consumers from the start. We've seen charging stations in some shopping malls here in Bangkok that for the first 6 months were providing this for free. And I was wondering, why are they doing this? Because at the end of the day, the people who have bought an electric vehicle, if they based it on the model that electricity would come for free, they haven't budgeted for it, right? So they've taken loans to buy their cars, but later their cost of maintenance and of usage is actually going to increase when they are going to have to pay the real price of electricity. So I think we have to be a bit mindful also of this race for popularity, and rethink the way that we allocate the existing financial resources that governments around the planet have, and to put it into where it matters for a long-term perspective, right, and not for short-term gains.
That's an excellent perspective, Renaud, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. A quick reminder to follow us on our LinkedIn and other social media platforms. I will be back with more interviews and discussions from Energy Connect. Until then, goodbye.